Hi, welcome to Incite Your Month, the June edition. We put together a collection of our recommendations for decision makers, consisting of books, articles, podcasts, and the like. Hi, Harish. We know that you've been reading this month about culture. We've also been updating our website to talk about our offerings around culture. So it's a very timely suggestion and a timely topic to be discussing here. So tell me about your pick for article of the month.
So the pick for the article of the month was this post by Dharmesh Shah. The title of the article is "Culture is a Product," and we've often said something to this effect ourselves. We've seen companies putting in a lot of effort in defining, designing their product, and coming up with a story and a narrative to customers. A lot more effort has been put in the communication to the external world. And we've been saying that people, companies, organizations need to do a similar job, think on similar lines for internal audiences. So, this article I thought summed it up very nicely, where he talks about culture being a product. And this is a product for your employees, right? So, you need to be very deliberate. You have to do things like getting user feedback. One great line that I picked up from that article was that just like a product is never done, you have to keep iterating on culture also all the time. So yeah, this was my pick.
Yeah, in fact, our colleague Sirisha has often commented on the fact that culture is for your employees, right? Echoes what Dharmesh Shah says in this article as well. So, no wonder that you chose this for the article of the month.
Yes.
Now, let's move from there to the book of the month. What have you been reading?
Again, this is one of our top favorites. We never have any problem in recommending books written by these authors. So, this time's book recommendation is Upstream by Dan Heath. The book says it's only written by Dan Heath, but there are significant inputs by his brother Chip Heath as well. And Dan Heath, I would say, is true to form with this book as well. So, Upstream is about why we should not only react but also try and change something to prevent problems from occurring in the first place. And there's a great parable that he starts the book with, where he talks about somebody trying to save children drowning in the river. And they save one, there's another child, they save the second child. And then one of these guys starts swimming. So the other guy asks him, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm going to go upstream to stop whoever is actually putting these children in the river." This book talks about solving these kind of problems in advance. And the biggest challenge is it's impossible to measure something that does not happen, right? Which is why people don't end up doing that. Organizations book talks about healthcare systems and how it's very great in responding to a problem. The secret lies in ensuring that there are no problems in the first place. So the book talks very nicely about how upstream thinkers should actually figure out where you can get maximum leverage and how to do better at fixing these problems before they happen.
Interesting. I think while trying to talk about the value of things like future relevance and upleveling, one way in which we've been trying to look at the value of it is to say the cost of not doing it, or what if you do not put in place some systems like this. So do you see this fitting with that line of thinking?
Oh yeah, very much. This is again like the culture article. I thought
Mm.
Upstream was also echoing our thoughts, articulated it in a nice way. A lot of the things that we've been talking about. Again, look at things like yoga and the current whole controversy around yoga versus allopathy. Yes, when you have a problem, you have to go to a hospital and get it fixed with modern medicine. But there is value in preventive medicine as well,
Mm.
whether it's called medicine or preventive lifestyle. I think it's the same thing. You get into a situation where you don't have to face problems. That's the best way to win a war. I think that there's something similar in the Art of War by Sun Tzu as well, right?
Mm. Absolutely. I think that's a good time for me to bring up our summary of the month. It's called The Science of Living. It's a book. You could call it a pop science book. And it is about the science of everyday life. That's what struck me while reading this book summary. So, there are a lot of tips about the best way to conduct one's daily routines, mundane things. When do you have breakfast? When do you go to bed? How do you give yourself the best chance of sleeping well? One thing for me, I'm big into breakfast, but and I'm big into sleeping on time and getting my 8 hours. But it turns out that breakfast isn't all that important as I would have believed. And I also learned about the three important factors behind sleep: temperature, darkness, and routine. When we discuss sleep, we don't often talk about things like temperature and light. And I thought this was a very good Blinkist. I think everyone in our internal compound who read it enjoyed it and found something very useful about it. What did you make of it?
Yeah, I think again, all these small things, people tend to take them for granted. It's just about being deliberate once, probably, to figure out the right kind of process that you want to follow and then follow it mindlessly. But that one time deliberate thinking is what is required. And it's the same when you think of culture, it's the same when it comes to upstream thinking, it's the same about thinking about sleep as well, right? That one time effort in thinking about it is something that I think we wish we should do more of in everything that we do.
And for listeners, I just want to add that I was checking out The Science of Living. It turns out that it's better seen as a paperback book rather than a Kindle book or an ebook, because apparently it has lots of interesting infographics which are better seen held in your hand. So
Right.
that's a tip from all of us.
Yeah, yeah. So, what's your recommendation for SmartCasts that we've been doing?
We've again been busy recording the Smartcast. Our pick for this month is a conversation that I had with Asim Datar, who's a general manager at Microsoft Cloud. I thought that his journey and his conversation is particularly relevant to a lot of people watching this episode, because his is a very relatable journey. You can see him almost like that boy next door who went into engineering college and then has grown fairly rapidly by any standard to hold several important roles at Microsoft in just under a couple of decades. What he told us in that Smartcast was how he's handled these shifts, even though it's been internal shifts. He said that it's almost like going to three different types of businesses: fast growing, established, and so on. And so one thing that remained with me, which is wisdom that he has got from one of his mentors, is that when you evaluate a shift, one mistake people can do is to change too many things too drastically at the same time. So instead, he said, look at three aspects. One is the people you get to work with when you make a change, the domain you will be working in, and the skills that are relevant to that combination. And try to keep two of those legs constant and change the third. So that makes it more amenable in terms of managing that shift. And I thought this is a good sort of principle to keep in mind for a lot of other forms of change. You stabilize yourself, but you keep moving making one change, and then you see how things go. Let me also talk about our podcast episode for the month. So this was an episode from a show called In Our Time. It's a BBC podcast hosted by someone called Melvin Bragg, pretty well known on the media landscape there. So this is one of those very old, long-standing podcasts that were there even before podcasts were cool. This particular episode focused on the Longitude Act, which is way back in 1714 in Britain. And I was very fascinated by the whole episode because, for one, I'm growing to understand the importance of the oceans to commerce long back. If we were 300, 400 years ago and living in Britain, chances were that you would either be a clergyman or you would be on a ship going somewhere, like all very famous people at that time. So clearly, oceans were a big part of commerce then. And it turned out that seafarers and astronomers, they knew how to calculate the latitude of a position to great accuracy, but they couldn't do it for longitude. And so in 1714, the British government comes up with this act called the Longitude Act. Essentially, it is a reward, a big reward for anyone who can reliably create the system so that ships can determine their longitude. For me, it was, you don't think of some of these things you now take for granted. So for us, longitude is some you go to a
Given.
GPS for or go to an atlas for. How would someone like me have solved this problem? I just don't know where to start. So it turns out that there were multiple different approaches. Innovation flourished. A lot of interesting characters come and go. Isaac Newton takes a shot at it. The state plays a role. They use prizes. It also turns out that there were a lot of interesting candidate solutions, but they figured out that they hadn't thought about the feasibility at sea. For example, you have an instrument, but how do you mass produce this so that every ship has it? Should we give out a prize because you came up with the system or because it's a mass producible system? So this episode goes into, dips into uh, a lot of these issues. And people have often tried to use rewards or other mechanisms apart from patents to spur innovation. And I thought this is a very kind of a mix of a cautionary tale as well as a descriptive tale of how you can encourage innovation in your organization.
I think this was also from the Matt Ridley sphere of thinking and work.
So the good thing about British media, I think they've documented a lot of the history of innovation over the years. I sometimes look back at countries like India and ask that we must have been innovating. There must be a lot of homegrown solutions, just that we don't have a lot of strong evidence, something that we can pass on. And so people, organizations that are innovating need to also capture and disseminate that story. Otherwise, your story will be forgotten.
Yeah, capturing stories is extremely important. In fact, because you mentioned BBC, I was also reminded of this show called Connections, which makes these connections between different events through the history of time, where something that happened in one continent with something else in another country, and how they are interrelated to result in economic changes and political changes. It's a fantastic show. Again, a BBC show from I think 80s. Yeah.
Yeah, it's something you mentioned before, but I need to go and somehow find a copy of that.
Yes.
So, Harish, we started this episode talking about culture and how organizations need to make culture a habit. So, let's close with a habit building hack for some of our listeners.
Yeah. So this is probably an adaptation or my take on the whole thing about having visual reminder. You have the sign method of probably taking a calendar or putting a grid and putting a cross on it for every day that you do something. I think in his case it's about coming up with a joke or writing, and then you don't want to break the chain. Right, so it's the visual reminder part that and this I don't remember if I actually read this specific example somewhere, but I adapted it in my case. And I said, if I actually have a visual reminder of a bottle like this in front of me all the time, then I'll make sure that I don't forget to have water. So yeah, it's and again, it may not be true, but whenever I've actually had an opaque bottle, it has not really helped me as well as having a transparent bottle where I can see the amount of water inside as well. Yeah, that's one of the hacks that has helped me in making sure I stick to this habit. In fact, I've taken it to the next level where I've also kept some dumbbells next to my workplace to make sure that I'm actually using them during boring meetings, if not during live recordings like this.
Yeah, so the next time we will have a live demonstration. In fact, when you mentioned the Seinfeld method, it's a very interesting or underrated aspect that people quote the Seinfeld method of putting crosses as an example of how you want to maintain streaks.
Right.
You don't want to let yourselves down. But this aspect of it being a calendar in front of you with that big red cross is actually more powerful than maybe if you use an app or something like that, which is outside your field of vision. If you are using that room, you will look at it and it will
Correct.
either uh, guilt trip you or remind you or just play that very subtle role in your environment to get you to pursue your habit.
Yes.
All right. On that note, thanks, Harish. We will be back next month with another Incite Your Month episode. Take care. See you.
Thank you. Bye.